a friend of mine, we've spoken together a few times, and when Gabby emailed me a little while ago and said, can you recommend a speaker who can talk about SaaS? I didn't have to think twice before I recommended our next speaker. His name is Kaelig, K-A-E-L-I-G. He's from France, but Kaelig is not a French name, it's a Breton name. If he looks a bit sleepy, it's not because of any cheese deficit here in Romania, but he's flown in from Cambodia to be here. And he was representing France in the Apsara Dancing Championships in Cambodia because he's a trained Oriental dancer. Later on, he'll show you in the pub if you ask him nicely. So he's going to be talking about SaaS. SaaS is a preprocessor. I'm not a preprocessor using chat myself, because like Jeremy, I kind of have a romantic attachment to the primary languages of the web. But Kaelig assures me that SaaS is the best, and he's really nasty and can fight better than me. So I believe him, and I believe that so will you. Ladies and gentlemen, Kaelig.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks, Gabby, for inviting me to your amazing birthday party. Oh, all right. Yeah, sure. Right. So let's see if we can get that working, because this is actually Gabby's computer, and we haven't had time to test it properly. Cool. Let's get this computer to myself. Okay. Hi. So I'd like to talk to you about how we bridge the gap between developers and designers at The Guardian using SaaS. And before you get a bit scared about technicalities, I'd like to ask you a big show of hands, everyone. So who's this conference for? It's actually for the ones who write code. Cool. The ones who don't, that's fine as well. Great. Now the ones who use CSS preprocessors. Wow. And the ones who never heard of them. That's completely fine. This does pretty much for anyone. It's not necessarily about SaaS. It's actually about communicating between people in a team using technical tools. I'd like to tell you a little bit of a small story first. In 1999, the NASA decided to launch a probe to Mars, and unfortunately, it was entering the atmosphere of Mars, and as it was entering it, started burning and burning and burning, actually just exploded. And what happened is, it's a multi-billion-dollar project. You'd be like, come on, that has been rechecked. How come that can happen? Well, when calculating the parameters of the descent in the orbit, the scientists at NASA were communicating in both imperial and metric systems. Well, that led to a quite unexpected outcome. And you can't really call it a miscalculation per se, because both teams working together were right in their own domain. But what this story is telling us is that when you work on a project with different referentials, it can lead to really devastating outcomes. And by the way, I don't know if you're American or British here, but metric system is just the best. That's and if you're Romanian, you know that, right? I worked at The Guardian for about a year and a half, and you may know about The Guardian, or you've heard of it through the Snowden stories recently. And that was the best year of my life. That was just fantastic. I'm just going to go through a little bit about The Guardian and The Guardian website. So I didn't work on the paper, I worked on the new website. The Guardian was founded in 1821, whereas the website called guardian.co.uk at the time was founded in 1999. Now the paper is only distributed in the UK. The website, of course, is worldwide. And the distribution of the paper is around 180,000 copies, whereas as of July, it was 105 million unique browsers visiting the website. When I arrived a year and a half ago there, it was 85 million unique browsers. It's growing exponentially. It's really, the last year with the Snowden stories, the NSA, GCHQ, it was an amazing year to be there. This is what the Guardian.com homepage looks like if you visit it on a desktop. And it's a great website, readers love it. The information architecture there is top-notch. It's won a lot of awards as best news website of the year. But there's a few buts. So after 5 years of maintenance and adding more and more stuff to the site, it's become a monolithic beast, impossible to change. I've been tasked to, at some point, do a small CSS change on that. I had no idea what to do. It took me a day or two to actually set up the website local in my machine, and then I didn't even know what the process was. It's very undocumented, it's very cryptic. Anyway, developers don't love getting up in the morning and working on that kind of beast. Deploying changes to production can take hours, and you have to get a team set up. You have to actually plan it. That's something that we weren't really comfortable with. Also, the visual identity of The Guardian, designers have changed. The creative director came in like 2 years ago, completely new one, and the visual identity has changed a lot. And last but not least, that's what the landscape of devices is like today. And actually today, about 6,000 different configurations visit the Guardian website. That's huge. That's just, and that's growing, by the way. So obviously there's no way we can serve a desktop site to all those people. It's just, we can't get away with it, right? Telling stories with a desktop site when you're on mobile and pinching and zooming to read your news, it's just not good. So we decided to make that guy happy. And we made a website with progressive enhancement in mind. In 2012, it started as an experiment. And there was a mobile site before, but it was very basic. You couldn't really do any commenting on the website. You couldn't, there's many things you couldn't access on the website. So we started with a mobile version, very stripped down design. It was not really going up to desktop. I mean, it looked like a big exploded mobile site on a desktop. But we started with a very, very small and basic website. If you have JavaScript turned off, it's fine. You get the stories, you can navigate the site. Exactly with the same techniques as Jeremy showed us earlier. And from there, we built from the mobile to larger breakpoints. And every time we thought the content was breaking and we thought we could display it in a better way, we would improve it, add media queries, play with those breakpoints, up to desktop. And today, actually, you can navigate it on the desktop, and it's a decent experience. There's still a lot of work, but it's meant to completely replace the old desktop site. And most of all, it enables the Guardian to tell stories in a way, in a very compelling way, that hasn't been possible before. And on all platforms at the same time. The first story, we gave a dynamic look and that kind of very designy way. It was actually about the introduction of bisons in Romania. And this treatment was so popular inside the company that now we call these types of page the bison treatment. It's so people, instead of thinking about I don't know, like visual design terms, they're like, oh yeah, let's make this article bison. Let's bison this page. And the beauty of that is that it just works on most devices that exist. And it should also work on the ones that don't exist yet. So let's have a quick look at the numbers. But before, I'd like to say, the Guardian values are very much about openness, open journalism, making all the content available for free. And in that spirit, the whole source code of the Guardian website, the new one, is open source, and you can find it on GitHub at this address. Okay, so a couple of numbers. 68 contributors to that repository. About half of those engineers are going to touch HTML and CSS or the UI at some point, with very different levels of expertise. You could have sometimes actually a designer or a backend developer looking at just putting some HTML and CSS in there. But there's also front-end specialists. The CSS code base is of about 25,000 lines. I think maybe 20,000 now, because right before I left, I removed about 5,000 of them. This was kind of my going away present to them. And we deploy about 4 times a day. When the first website started, it was more like 20 times a year. And now if you look at all the deployments in development, production, and stuff like that, it's more than 10,000 individual deploys a year. It's very quick, and we want to keep it that way. So we work on this new website in cross-functional teams. We've got designers, developers, product managers, everyone put together in a single team and working on a specific set of features. So for example, there's a team that was doing that bison treatment, and they're in charge of making the content pages look good, articles, videos, audio. And I was in a team that was more into navigation, all the Chrome of the website, plus the homepage and the section pages. There was a team during the football World Cup that was actually tasked only to do football stuff on the website. Now there's another team for the CMS as well. It's very separate. It's a set of APIs that the front end of the Guardian that you see when you visit it doesn't really care about. It's just actually a UI on top of those APIs. And like the NASA guys, who spoke in inches and centimeters, actually when we started this project, it was exactly the same. We were speaking very, very different languages. It was very blurry sometimes. And you know, the print version has been here for centuries, and now this print industry has had so much time to mature and have very specific words, very specific processes, really well-oiled workflows. But on the web, we don't really have that, especially when it comes to responsive web design, because it's a completely new field. So here's how it works. In a typical stream, we're given a problem to solve. And then we come with ideas. So for example, recently we thought, okay, so how can we increase the number of the engagement on the website? And we came with one idea. It's let's add a little label next to the search icon that says search. Simple, right? And we thought, well, maybe if it's written search, it's not just an icon, but actual label. People are going to click more on it and then perform more searches, creates more engagement. So we might produce one or multiple prototypes, and then we test it. We put it in front of users, we test it. And to test that, we need to measure it. So we built it, we deployed it, and we measured it. And we need to see how, like really quickly, how users were answering to those changes. So we built a suite of tools available to anyone in a company. Again, the kind of openness of the Guardian is really, really good in that regard. Any journalist or any developer, any designer can access this kind of tool. And that's great because it empowers people to make changes on the website and check if it's going well, did they break anything, does the traffic increase, decrease, did the performance did your change have an impact on performance? So this is a screenshot of a tool called OFAN, and it tracks everything that's going on the website right now. Page views, where do people come from? Where was the story published? Is it on the homepage? Is it just hidden somewhere else on the website? And depending on those changes, so for example, an editor decides to put a story right in the middle of the homepage. He can track if that had an impact on the traffic in real time. And it's the same for when we make a change as developers and designers. So for example, we changed that little label. We added the search label. And we made an A/B test to test, okay, what's the engagement if we don't have a label and if we have one? And then we track the engagement. So that's multivariate testing, also known as A/B testing, and that removes emotions out of the debate. It's very important when you work in a very fast-paced environment to make sure that the highest paid in the team does not get to make the calls. It's the data that counts. So we track what people do in real time with our changes. So what's really happening here? We go from an idea, we build it, we test it. But we don't want to stop here. What really happens is that we start again and again and again and again until we're really happy with the results. Or, if the data says, that's just not working, well, we can bin it. And if someone really, really cares about that set of features, well, the data shows that it's just not working, so. And you'd be actually very surprised how much stuff we put on the website, lives 2 weeks there, just goes away. The old website that I showed you, the desktop site, was more like, let's put stuff on the website. And that's it. And it stayed. It stayed so long, and that's why it's a massive beast, really hard to maintain. So that way, we avoid having a product bloated with features. Now, our context, just to sum it up, we have a lot of contributors with different sets of skills. People speaking very different languages, designers and developers, sometimes not really understanding each other, marketing, product. And we release it early and often, and we want to keep it that way. And to follow that context, developers have the liberty to choose whatever is best for the job to accomplish their task. So don't worry, I'm not going to talk to you about all of this right now. I'm just going to focus a little bit on SAS. SAS is a preprocessor, a CSS preprocessor. It's basically a little box of software in which you put SAS, and outside comes CSS. So what's really interesting about SAS is that it adds programming language features to CSS. So for example, if and else conditions, variables, nested selectors, functions, mixins, number manipulations, so you can do maths. And lots of really cool stuff that it's not a toy for us developers. It's not just something that we just like because we just like playing with development tools. It's because that's going to help us writing code that's much more meaningful than just simple CSS. Okay, let's talk about colors. In CSS, the colors are typically represented in hexadecimal, RGB, HSL, and unfortunately that's not really a form of representing a color that humans understand. So let's say a designer wants a headline to be light gray. Now, we have 8 different grays in our color palette. So, as a developer, I have no idea what a light gray is. What if we could speak about colors that would make sense to humans, and we could translate it into code really simply? So here's what we did. We took all the existing colors on the website and gave them names that we could all refer to. And to get back to our 8 shades of gray, we decided to call them neutral 1, 2, 3, 4, until 8. And this is documented in that document that I just showed you. And it's much more specific than just light gray. And much more human-friendly than hash DC, DC, DC. So what does it look like in code? This is a very simple piece of syntax. Even if you don't know what Sass is all about, you can understand that here. I'm saying this variable called brand blue should be this hexadecimal color. And then, if I want the background of the navigation to be that color, I'm just calling that variable in this as a CSS value. Very straightforward. It's actually one of the first uses of Sass that you're going to do if you use Sass, or any preprocessor really. And that compiles into that CSS. So what does that mean? It means that thanks to the CSS preprocessor, not only we get code that is meaningful, when I read that code I know what color that is, but also if we change the color of the brand, I just have to change one variable at the beginning of, like, in my settings file. And then all the website just translates into that new color. And you'd be like, hang on, you've changed the brand blue? Like, does that happen often? No, it doesn't. But it happened a few weeks ago. And all of a sudden the branding changed. And the blue changed from a quite dark blue to that new blue. And I had to change all my slides too. And we just had to change that little variable, and the whole site looked with a new, like it had a new branding. That's pretty cool, saving us a lot of time. And so, if a designer wants a title to have the neutral 1 color, it just tells it to the developer, and the developer just remembers, oh, okay, so that's $C neutral 1. Super simple. And then it just converts itself into the right color in the CSS. And that's just really, really cool for communication, because instead of the designer having to speak in hexadecimal, or the developer to try to understand whatever the color the designer is talking about, just technology is just taking care of that for us. So a few takeaways here. Code is a communication tool. It's not just a toy for us to play with. And a preprocessor avoids constant copy and pasting of values that are meaningless when you read your code. Now let's talk about breakpoints. Since we're making a responsive website here, we have to use media queries to adapt the layout to the device of our reader. And a bit more than a year ago, we were just using very simple media queries. Now, when I read this, I have no idea what device this is going to apply code to, or what type of string. So then we used variables again, and we set the tablet variable to be 37.5 amps. So that's a bit more meaningful. But that's not enough. You can do much better with Sass actually. So we thought, let's create a mixin that is very, very simple and does the coffee thing for us. Just we don't have to think. We want to go to apply a style from this breakpoint to this other breakpoint. And I don't have to think about ands. I don't have to think about converting pixels into ands, whatever. So, for example, here, in that little last piece of syntax, I'm applying this style from tablet until desktop. I'll go back to the naming of the breakpoints later, but this is just an example. And again, here I just want the style to apply until tablet. So we created a mixin for that, and it's open source as well. And it's reusable media query abstraction. It means that all over our code base, you can use that media query abstraction, and it translates a name into the actual media query. And also, what's coming for free with that is cross-browser support. So IE8 doesn't support media queries. How do we tackle that problem? Well, actually, what we do is that with SASMQ, we just say to SASMQ, okay, take everything up to desktop, just bundle it all together, flatten it, don't remove all the media queries out of it, and just serve that to IE8. That's pretty cool. It means that IE8 support for the layout or anything just comes for free. And with all the examples I showed you here, until there, that was not possible. We had to create a new set of rules for IE8. But here, it comes for free. So that's pretty cool. Now, here's what it looks like. Here, I'd like the navigation to be, again, have a brand blue background. But starting from the tablet breakpoint, I'd like that background to become transparent. Well, that's super easy. I just have to write @include MQ from tablet, and then the background will be transparent. And it will be in IE8 as well. That compiles into all the media query stuff that I don't have to care about. It's completely abstracted away. Now, naming breakpoints. We declare all our breakpoints in one place in the configuration file of the project. And when we needed to change the tablet breakpoint recently, it was very easy to do because that was standing in one single file. So now naming breakpoints is a bit of a tough, it's a tough subject. As you saw, we called our breakpoints mobile, tablet, desktop, and wide. That's very descriptive, but it's because in our world, people were talking like this. They were not talking about t-shirt sizes, small, medium, large, and extra large. So to ease communication, we went a little bit against our belief that naming breakpoints should be a bit more agnostic, and we went to a more pragmatic way of naming things. So we called them mobile, tablet, desktop, and wide. And everyone knows exactly what we're talking about. Even if it's product people, we don't have to explain to them, oh, it's a large, medium, So it's very pragmatic. If you take with here again, technically complex things, which are media query and cross-browser support, can be abstracted away to look much simpler. And this is a very small tool. It's a very small piece of code, but it's well tested and it's very robust. It's in its own repository. And we took some time to code it properly, but then it gave us so much peace of mind afterwards because we didn't have to care about IE8 anymore. That was just going for free. And changing breakpoints in the code was so much easier. So let's talk about the grid. So a grid is a series of horizontal and vertical virtual guides that will help distributing elements in a very coherent way on the screen. Actually, it comes from the print world to create layouts on paper. And it plays a very important role for legibility and hierarchy of the content. So for us, obviously, it's massively important. For us, the grid goes from 4 to 16 columns of 60 pixels each. The gutters, 20 pixels. The outer margins change to between 10 and 20 pixels, depending on your viewport size. I'm not going to bore you with those details, but unfortunately, our CSS is completely oblivious to how many pixels a grid unit is. So let's say I'm a designer, and I'd like an object, an element, to be 3 columns by default, and then when you reach desktop, it should be 7 columns wide. Well, that could be pretty easy to code, right? You just calculate the number of pixels that 3 columns are what it means in pixels to be 3 columns, then how many ends it is to be a desktop breakpoint, and then what the width of the element is when it's 7 columns. But what if we could just use I don't know, mid-sins and stuff? Let's see what we did. So we documented in SAS what it meant to be all of these measures, so that the developer doesn't have to remember, oh, that's 60 pixels, the better is 20 pixels, outer margin, stuff like that. So we created a set of little helpers that make the code very meaningful. And how do we use this? Well, let's get back here. From pixels that don't mean anything to me when I read this. When I just read the code, I can't tell how many columns that is, and what the breakpoint is. But when I read this, that's much simpler. I'm just reading, okay, the width of that element will span on 3 columns, and then starting at desktop, it will span on 7. That's pretty cool. And actually what we did is that we based our breakpoints on the grid. Everything I showed you before with the breakpoint definition file, well, here's what it really works. It looks a bit cryptic, but what it means is that we based our breakpoints not only on a device landscape, we based it on the design. And if you've read articles from Stephen Hay or watched his talks, he talks a lot about being content first. And what it means is starting from the content and adding the Chrome later, not adding the Chrome and putting the content in it. So that's exactly what we do here. We built our system of breakpoints around the content, not the other way around. So we combine that grid system with the media query abstraction, and we have major breakpoints, which are mobile, tablet, desktop, and wide, and then we have minor breakpoints, tweak points, we call them. Now, where it's really interesting is when we create a new breakpoint, we just document it here. And every developer knows exactly what it is, but we can add comments to it if it's really cryptic. It's just a single place to tell everyone in a project, oh, this is how the breakpoint system works, and on what number of columns it is based. So a few takeaways. The machine can do math a lot better than we can, and we should just give it that chance because we can focus on doing other stuff which the machine can't do, like being creative. And the sum of the parts of your system is much, much better than the whole. If you combine them all together, you can build amazing things. Let's talk about typography. Here's a screenshot of the responsive website as it looked on desktop a few months ago. If you look closely, you find that there is a lot of font sizes, different typography settings, and different families, different weights. At the scale of the whole website, we saw that it became quite complex to manage all those different bits and pieces of information. And also, the coherence between visual patterns across the website was becoming a bit anarchic. So, if we decompose the homepage into the different patterns, we see that there is, well, not that many of them, but at the scale of the website, again, that is a lot. And that became quite complex, especially when designers and developers have very, very different ways to talk about typography. So this is the drop-down of what it looks like to have the Guardian web fonts in Photoshop. Actually, those are not the web fonts, those are the print fonts. And they have very weird names called DE1, DE0, DE7, DS7, whatever. And we don't refer as developers to those naming conventions at all. For us, a web font could be called Guardian A-Gate Sans 1 Web. That's what the Foundry gave us. Look at this, you're like, yeah, that's not the same tool. So we need to, every time a designer was telling us, oh, you should make that headline DS5, we're like, yeah, well, I don't know what that means. So we had to look into our code and bring back the memories of, well, okay, so that web font, oh, sorry, so we use for bold, we use the medium, and then they're telling us to be, okay, so that might be this font family with this weight, but I'm not sure. And then if there was a change, I mean, designers never change their minds, but just in case, if there was a change, you have to repeat that process again. So what we created is a matrix of all the possible font weights, all the names into the designer software, all the names into the CSS, and the names into the SAS. And we said, okay, we're just going to answer to that top line on the top. It is just the language we're going to use. So you can see here, we called the first family header, then headline, then body heading, body copy, data, text fonts. These are the 6 families we're going to answer to, and when we talk about fonts, we're just going to call them that. And then for the sizes, we just created a scale to make sure that across the website you can find 11, 12, 13 of the same font representing the same type of content at multiple places. So we were constraining the number of sizes and line heights you could use. And so let me show you how that matrix is usable. That looks quite complex when you look at it for the first time, but that's really interesting. That is I think, the best time saver we've had at the Guardian. So here's what it would look like in SAS if I wanted an element to have a typography setting of FS header 1. And it compiles to the correct font size, the correct line height, the correct font family, and the correct font weight. As a developer, I don't have to remember all the settings. I don't have to write 4 lines of code. I just want to write 1. And again, if the designer hypothetically decides to change their mind, I just change from header 1 to header 2. I just change that little 1 in the mixin, the value of the mixin, and just changes everything accordingly. So what does that become when you look at the homepage again? Well, we just talked in terms of header 1, headline, headline 6, text fonts 1, and we can discuss design decision according to that common language instead of trying to think, hang on, that might be Guardian, Web, Egyptian, whatever, and font weight 700, when the designer is actually talking about DE5, and for them it's like normal. So making changes and iterating on a product became so much faster. It's incredible, that kind of thing, that kind of use. It might seem complex, but actually it enabled us to release and to discuss and to focus on the idea side of things instead of the building side of things. So I've been asked, isn't that putting a cap on creativity if you have like this big matrix system and you have to do this, everything accordingly to that matrix, otherwise you might burn in hell? Well, what we found is that thanks to that matrix, and it's true for the color palette as well, our design is indeed restrained by this limited set of font sizes, weights, families, but the holistic user experience is so much better. Because comparing to having a free-for-all where designers joining the teams out of nowhere can do whatever they want and reinvent the wheel, they would have to think about, oh, okay, so what's the existing set of things that I can play with. And then we could build new features really quickly without deteriorating the user experience. Now again, a few takeaways. When no naming convention is in place, because everyone's speaking completely different languages, and it's very, very hard to change their process. So for example, it was very hard for us to just break years of print design naming conventions, just get together, sit down, and invent a new one. And putting design principles into the code is what can improve your holistic user experience. So let's get back to where we left earlier. What happened in the past is that between the idea and the prototype, we constantly had to jump back to the design system. Then from the prototype to the testing, and we're going back and kind of iterating on that, had to go back to the design system. And between the test and the idea, again. And that was really, it's perturbating? Is that a word? Anyway, that was influencing the way we were working, and it was making us so slow compared to where we wanted to be. So, how could we put the designer's thoughts into the machine and make that process so much seamless? Well, through all the examples I just showed you, what we really did is that we put the design system at the center of the code, and we didn't have to go back to it constantly. And what that does is not just playing with technology, and again, it's not just a toy. What we did is that we could focus on the product and the creativity side of things. That's what machines don't do. And we could keep iterating on the UI at a very, very fast pace. So, thanks to the way we use our tools, there was no more confusion between inches, centimeters, the dead king's foot. And I deeply think that bridging the gap between designers, developers, and vice versa is basically putting everyone on the same level when we're having discussions to deliver the common message to our users. And whether you're working at the NASA or not, probably not. Well, maybe that's what's going to do a difference when you put your product in orbit. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kaelig. You kind of persuaded me that SAS is worth looking at, actually, which I'm shocked at. So, thanks. Any questions for Kaelig? We've got time for one or two. There's a gentleman there, if there's a microphone anywhere. Guy in green down.
Thank you. My name is George Pizza. I'm a startup program manager at SmartWeb. Nice to meet you. And I know this wasn't the core of your talk, but I'm going to take advantage of your experience. You talked about the way you do testing and see how your changes influence the results. I have a very complicated question. How do you deal with the difference between correlation and causation in what you do? So how do you know that the change in the design actually made those changes in your views or your engagement?
We built an A/B test framework that allowed us to bring a set of features or very small change to a certain type of users only. And we would, for example, take 1% of the users, break that percent in two, and see what those people were doing, whereas the rest of the website was just people getting the normal experience. Of course, data can't tell the whole story, and that's why we had also a data analyst team that is trying to make sense out of these numbers, then comes back to the product manager, and the product manager tries to make decisions according to that data, to that story. But of course, it's never perfect, and it's very hard to qualify that quantity. It's very, very hard. So even though data is supposed to take emotion out of the debate, sometimes people are really tired of having to rely too much on data. And there's no perfect answer. I think everyone right now who's working on a product, who's doing kind of crunching all those numbers, trying to make sense out of them, is struggling with it a little bit. Yes, there's always something that might make result look like increasing or decreasing, and you're not sure why. But when you make all those little changes, you just have to trust your data and your guts at the same time. And I don't know if that answers the question, but
thank you.
Right, I'm going to keep to the schedule because it's coffee break time.
One question.
One more question, okay.
Thanks for the great talk. One thing about, because I talked with Patrick Hamann on Front-End conference about your website, and I want to know how you ensure your clients to make this quite revolutionary website, to be sure that will be right way from the traditional website to this new way.
yeah, it's been a hot topic internally and externally. We read Twitter a lot, and we have lots of feedback channels, and we see that people on desktop are not very happy with the new responsive site. Well, at least the very engaged users are very, very voicey about how they hate the new design or stuff like that. Because it kind of looks, it's very hard to make a responsive website fast and grow up to desktop really well, and then the acceptance of the users or clients or consumers is very, very, very hard to do. So we try to have focus groups and try to understand what people really care about, and we try to make those changes really quickly to accommodate for those complaints. And also we roll out progressively. So for example, Australia will get the responsive site earlier than the rest of the planet. And we're going to try to see what's going on there, how people use it, if people hate it or love it, and why they do so. And then that's a good experiment to start with. We still allow users to go back to the old version, the classic desktop site. And yeah, it's just trying to roll out progressively because it's a high-risk project, right? That you can't just switch everyone to the new website just like that when you have so much commercial interest. Like displaying all those ads is something that is important to the business.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, you mostly rely on the user opinion, and because now I checked that you launched your new web page on production, and a few months ago it was like on beta stage, and it was for choosing the new version, and now it's on production. So so it's everything okay, and the users are happy if you decided to make it for all.
Well, there's a very, very engaged core set of users. Like people who view, I don't know, 60 pages per day. And for us, that's a lot, because the average page views is like 2 or something.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There's a question down there.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Marius. I have a small question. How did you overcome the year limit of 4,096 selectors?
Oh, we didn't get there. But there's every time you try to push to master, there is a task that runs that verifies that there is not that limit reached. Because yeah, we track the selectors on number of selectors, the weight of all the style sheets to make sure that they're not exceeding that number.
Okay, thank you.
And the last one just behind.
I'm Raz, and I really like what you do with the typography mixes. I thought that was pretty cool. However, I didn't like what she did with the mobile, with the breakpoint naming convention.
Okay.
I believe we have, like, there's tablets with resolutions bigger than a desktop, and desktops with resolutions smarter than phones or something like that. But and I think that small, medium, large is a better approach. What do you think?
I think use whatever works for you, because for us, again, it was something that had to do with the way people were discussing about breakpoints. And when we have a discussion about the design, the product decision, we don't want to speak different language with advertising, marketing, product designers and developers. We want everyone to be on the same page. And if we have to circulate the information that everything's called large, whatever, wide, and stuff like that.
So basically, find a common language no matter how you see things.
Yeah.
Everybody understands.
I mean, some companies actually call their breakpoints like Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. You know, it's cool. If it works for you, just use that. It's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kaelig. It's now coffee time, so grab some coffee, grab some cakes. There's a big bag of cocaine that's just one line.